You know, way back when, Buckminster Fuller said, "There's no doubt in my mind that Barbara Marx Hubbard is better informed about futurism than any human being on the planet." That's quite a statement. And that's when she was just getting started. Can you imagine what Bucky Fuller would say about her today, all these years later, and what she's led us through? She's the president of the Foundation for Conscious Evolution. She was the co-producer of Birth 2012. Neil Donald Walsh has recently written a biography entitled About Barbara, the Mother of Invention. She, from my point of view, is the most innovative, visionary person of our times, and she's here with us today. Please welcome Barbara Marx Hubbard. Thank you.
He gave away all my best lines. Well, I'm very, very excited to be here. Edgar Mitchell has been a tremendous influence in my life, because for me, the entire space program and the Apollo program introduced me to the idea that we are an evolving species. And my subject tonight is evolutionary spirituality. And I'd like to just give you how I discovered it, and what I think it means to us, and how important it is in our evolution. It started for me in 1945, when the United States dropped the bombs on Japan. There we took the brilliant knowledge, E = mc squared, and we could build a bomb to destroy the world. And I realized if we continued to use that power in self-centered consciousness, we would destroy everything. So I asked a simple question: what is the meaning of all our new power that's good? What are images of the future human equal to science, industry, technology? And we could see way ahead to the high-tech new powers that we would want to become. And I will not go through my journey, but I found nobody knew. And the reason nobody knew is the powers are radically new. The church didn't know, Bryn Mawr didn't know. I got to meet President Eisenhower in 1953 in the Oval Office, and I said, "Mr. President, I have a question for you." "Yes, young lady?" "What do you think is the meaning of the military, industrial, scientific power that's good?" And he looked at me and he said, "I have no idea." So I thought, well, we better find out. And I've been on a long journey, and I want to tell you what I think I found out. And it started for me with Teilhard de Chardin. When I read The Phenomenon of Man in the 1960s, he was the first person who made the meaning of evolution for me. He said, "Take away God, take away Christ, give me matter." And he saw in matter what he called the law of complexity consciousness. As systems become more complex, they jump in consciousness, freedom, and synergistic order. In other words, there is a tremendous direction in evolution. And then he said, here's where it's going. And he wrote this in the 50s before internet. The noosphere, he said, the thinking layer of Earth, the mind sphere, is going to get its collective eyes. And when that happens, it can be infused with exactly the kind of love and consciousness we have in this room. And that noosphere, when it gets its collective eyes, we will experience what he called the Christification of the earth. He was a Jesuit Christian paleontologist. I would call it the awakening of love. In other words, he foresaw a quantum jump in the lineage of higher order, greater complexity, greater consciousness. And the minute I read that, I must have been in my early 30s, in the 1960s when I read it, and I dedicated myself to the noosphere. I'm sure I'm the only woman who ever did that. I became thrilled at the thought that evolution is going somewhere, and even more than that, it's going the same way I want to go. Now that was a big revelation, because I was at that time a frustrated housewife in Lakeville, Connecticut, with 5 children and a bit of depression and wondering what I was doing on Earth. When I read, my desire for more life, more creativity, that I want to participate in something great, which was neurotic from a Freudian analytical point of view, that somehow this was the direction of evolution. And I became what I'm considering to be an identity for all of us. I became the universe in person, which is to say, the deep impulse in each of us to express, to be, to create, to love more is the impulse of evolution incarnate. That the closer any of us get to knowing that deeper impulse of creativity and love and say yes to it, the more that inner impulse and we become one. It is a whole new way of saying God and I are one. And if you say yes, like so many people in this room have said yes to the impulse of evolution within them, not only do you and that impulse become one, but you get activated and regenerated and guided by the impulse. So not only is it coming from the whole field of consciousness that our awareness is greater, but the internalization of the impulse of evolution, because it's unique to every single human being, it guides every one of us. And here's another stunning observation, is that nature for billions of years has been creating whole systems out of separate parts, from single cells to multi-cells, all the way on up. And as Bruce Lipton points out, through epigenetics, when the membrane of a cell is such that more individual cells come in, it changes the script within each cell that is part of the larger whole. And the whole is greater than, different than, and unpredictable from the sum of its parts. The genius that I could be 52 trillion cells, they say, with how many hundreds of billions of microorganisms talking like this. And what am I organizing about it? Absolutely nothing. So the power of this universal process of creation, incarnate in every one of us as our own impulse to create, picking up the genius of the whole process of creation, has a tendency to want to connect with other parts, other humans, such that we might be right at the threshold of creating a whole system greater than, different than, and unpredictable from the sum of the parts. In other words, our love and our attraction for each other is not just a personal issue. If you go back to quarks being attracted to quarks and cells to cells and multicells to multicells, all the way on up, the universe is a love story. The universe is a great love story, and we're part of that love. So I want to tell you an experience I had that gave me a clue about what we can do. I was asking my usual question, what's the meaning of our power? And in this case, I'd been reading the New Testament, and I asked, not so much as a Christian, but I asked as a storyteller, what story could we tell that would be as great as the story of the birth of Christ? Stories, as we've been saying here, every other speaker has said it, stories create reality. And when you believe a story, and when a whole culture believes a story, that's the way the story goes. That's the way the culture goes. So I said to the universe, I want to know our story. that is as important to know as the story of the birth of Christ. With that, the universe opened up and I became an astronaut. And I saw Earth from space as a living system rather than as a beautiful blue planet. Because when the astronauts saw it, the distance was such that they only saw the beauty of the whole. But I was a little bit closer, and I began to watch a living system struggle, because that's exactly what we are. We're an organism. And I felt the pain so great throughout the whole living organism that in one moment we stopped. It's almost like 9/11. We've stopped a few times, almost. In this I call it a precognitive flash. What happened is we completely stopped, even for an instant, and what started to happen was empathy. Empathy started to course rapidly through the nervous systems of the planet. Now, we've felt that before, haven't we? We felt it many times, but it stops. And we go back to the illusion of separateness, and we go back to the various contentions. But in what I began to call a planetary birth experience, the empathy didn't stop. And right after the empathy came the next stage of the emergent humanity, and this was spirit came within everyone and was heard by each person in their own language, in their own image, in their own words. It was a minor planetary Pentecost. Everybody heard it from within in their own language, and what happened? The walls came tumbling down. The walls of the religions that had given us all this tremendous wisdom in different cultures simply became beautiful archetypes of the past when we heard it from within. And we did, enough of us, along with the empathy. See, this is almost happening. That's why it's so great. It's happening in this room right now. So we had the empathy, we had the hearing from within, and then we had healing. You know, when Jesus would walk through a village, people would get healed in his presence, just as he walked by. What happened there? I believe that when the empathy and the inner spirituality is being experienced, it's an innate natural healer. Yes? We were healing ourselves, and when we started healing ourselves in this empathy and speaking out our own love of spirit, what happened is the mass media had to pick up the good news. And we had a sudden conversion of the mass media to covering the story of what the people were actually experiencing, and the mass media got healed. Big thing. But just jumping back to Teilhard for a moment, don't forget the planet has grown a new nervous system in the last 15 years, and it's internet. It's Facebook, it's Twitter, it's 7 billion cell phones and counting. It's an enormous nervous system has been given, and it's open to us. So what I experienced in that planetary birth experience was that when we started to speak that way and the healings and the mass media came, the next thing that came was the Buckminster-Fuller scenario. Now, Bucky said, as you all know, we now have the resources, technology, and know-how to make the world work for everyone. Well, that's true too. When we were in empathy and creativity and the news of who we are, what happened was in this, and I'm putting it in the past tense as though it already happened, what happened was the same power that coordinates particles to make new wholes all the way on up the billions of years began to coordinate the health, education, economics, new energy systems, new governing systems, new consciousness systems, began to self-organize, and within a very short period of time, we found that we could heal, we could educate, we could feed, we could clothe, we could care for everybody on earth, and that's already true too. I experienced that entire sequence in a flash, And as I was feeling it in my body, since I'd asked the universe the question, what is our story comparable to the story of the birth of Christ? If we knew it, what would it be? And so I heard the words, I would say from a universal consciousness, our story is a birth of a co-creative universal humanity. Our crisis is the crisis of the birth of an emerging species. Go tell the story, Barbara. That was a vocation of destiny, because it's really, literally true. And what happened to me when I said yes to going to tell the story that we're a species whose crisis is natural. See, it's natural that we overgrew the womb of Earth. We didn't know. When I graduated from Bryn Mawr in 1951, we were all told, get married and have as many babies as you possibly can. And we did. I had 5. I mean, how many people are having 5 now who were the age I was at 21? So I was the last generation of the old order. The new order has come in, all of these things. So instead of criticizing ourselves for having been so guilty of having overgrown the womb of Earth, I think we have to say our crisis is a birth. If we continue to do it, we will destroy ourselves. But if we can be activated by that crisis to coordinate and to integrate our life purposes with one another in connecting what's already working, we will find that we're being born as a universal species. And it turns out that this generation, and maybe even these next 5 to 10 years, are the years where we have to catch hold of this story. So this is not just a nice metaphor. If we say our crisis is the birth of a co-creative, co-evolving humanity, and we stop overgrowing the womb of Earth, what do we start doing? Most of these problem solvers do not give us the passion to what we want to do. What we actually want to do is everybody to identify what that creative purpose is, to do it with all our heart and soul, and to connect that which is creative on this earth. If we took the next 5 years and said our purpose would be by 2020, we would connect enough of the co-creators in health, education, economics, in every sector of human endeavor, in every culture, and for the very first time get an actual picture of the emerging world that's already in our midst, which we have never seen before. We've never seen our world working at the scale that it's possible for it to work. What if we were to take a shared movement, just like our wonderful poet was saying? What if we had a movement to connect what's working and show up by 2020 as the beginning of the next stage of human self-evolution? What would you think of that? Why not? Let's do that. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I want to back up for a minute and just say, because my subject was evolutionary spirituality, I'd like to tell you what I think it is and how evolutionary spirituality is going to help us have this movement. I've very simply named evolutionary spirituality with 4 E's to help me remember exactly what's happening to me and so many others. The first E is eternal. So in evolutionary spirituality, we are one with consciousness, just like that brilliant man was saying at the beginning of this session. One with consciousness, with God, with Source, eternal. Second E is embody. it is a stunning realization that every one of us is a resume of the entire story of creation. Every atom, molecule, cell, mammalian brain, early brain, human brain, maybe evolutionary brain, all of this, we are the universe in person, showing up. And if you just jump a little bit to people like Aurobindo, who saw that we would become the Gnostic human, we would become humans that actually incarnate the genius of evolution, the supramental powers of evolution. And I feel that that's exactly what starts to happen if you realize, that we embody the whole process of creation, and that when the full consciousness of being human arises, when I sense of myself and others, I'm embodying the genius of evolution. The genius that created a universe is in every one of us. Oh my God. Turn that on. Evolutionary spirituality starts to turn that on. So when I look at anyone and I see a thumb, I see an ear, I see eyes, I say, oh my God, what did it take to do that? It's a huge appreciation for what it took to do all of this. And then the next part of this is the third E is emerge. As Brian Swim says, the universe always wants more. Every one of us is the universe in person emerging. Yes? Wow. So we're not only embodying, we're emerging. And what are we emerging as? Well, that's where you have to say, I'm incarnating the impulse of evolution as my own impulse to create. We're creative. God is creating godlings. Creator is creating co-creators. When we say yes to the impulse of evolution, in evolutionary spirituality, which is to say to give divine reality to the impulse itself, to the process of creation itself, divine beyond imaginations of genius, to create an entire universe, and we as part of it. So emerge is that growing edge of every single human being alive. And the big yes in evolutionary spirituality is not only yes, personally I can do it, but yes, universe, I'm here for you. Yes, universe, help me, do me, be me, through me, and you and the universe start to collaborate. And you start to tune into the genius of the universe, and you even start to regenerate. I'm 85 years old. What got into me? The universe. The saying, it's the universe. And then the last E, I just really thought of it, and this was my dear friend Emmanuel was making fun of this, but it's eros. And here, if you have eternal, embody, emerge, erotic. What is this? I am going to make a claim for the evolution of sexuality. Now that is a really big idea. Here's the idea, the evolution of sexuality. We've hit a limit to massive procreation. So we're going to be having fewer children and children by choice. What's been happening, and it started with the women in the 60s particularly, is the urge to reproduce up to maximum, which I was the last generation in this culture to see this is the thing to do. What started to happen is the women began to rise up for feminine power, feminine equality, and we have done that, folks. That's really been done well. But what began to happen to me as a woman is I jumped into the idea through Teilhard de Chardin, Sri Aurobindo, mainly, is that I am incarnating the impulse of evolution as my yearning to express, to create, and to be, and that instead of joining genes to have the baby, which is a tremendous innovation of nature, the impulse is to join genius, to give birth to the greater self and the greater world. And that's where the vocational arousal comes in. Because if you find somebody who really loves what you long to express and give, you get vocational arousal. And when you get your vocational arousal, what you want is to join your genius. And if you're fortunate enough to find people with whom to join your genius, it's so pleasurable that Mother Nature has put pleasure into joining genius, just like she did to joining genes. But since she doesn't want us to have more and more and more babies indiscriminately, she's given more and more pleasure to joining genius. Has anybody discovered that? This is what's happening here. We're joining genius all over the place. Every single place I go, I'm sitting down, I'm joining genius. And so, telerotic, this is really a great word. When eros, you put the universal love story, that desire, all things joining to join at higher and higher order, you put that together, eros, together with the purpose of the impulse of evolution within you as your desire to create, in the name of the larger process itself, you put that together, you get telos and eros, and you get telerotic instead of neurotic. I was bordering on neurotic as a housewife in Lakeville with the 5 children. The moment I picked up on telos and eros and this, I became telerotic. Now it's good for you. It's health-giving. It's actually better than a facial. It's so much fun. This was what was happening at the table yesterday. We were laughing because Emmanuel, he was so telerotic that he said he finally figured out what had happened to him his whole life. He was telerotic. Well, so was everybody else at the table. So was almost everybody I know. So I want to give you the finale here. The finale would be a moment of total teleros for the universe, for the earth. Now, this is a serious thing. Ervin Laszlo, who has been my partner in many times as an elder of this, and we're going down to Monterrey, Mexico to do a big wheel of co-creation to put people in every sector of the wheel, like Claudio Naranjo and Bruce Lipton and famous people, to say, what would happen if we synergize? What would happen if we connect the dots of what's already working on this earth? And I would like to declare that if in 5 years we collectively decided to have a global invitation for people everywhere on earth who are impelled to create something creative, good, and for the good of the whole, to start identifying it in an internet site that is designed to self-organize what's working by region, by a subject, until we could get a vision of what's already emerging in this world. And I've talked this over with Ervin Laszlo because he took us all to China and he made the statement there that if we don't get ecological consciousness in the next 5 years, we will go extinct. It doesn't mean that we've solved everything, but we have to change consciousness. Now, there's an awful lot going on about how we've done things wrong, and that's absolutely true. But I would say there's almost nothing going on about what we can create and are already creating. For somehow the news doesn't tell us it, and by God, what is the news? This is the news. The news is not only where we're making our mistakes, and most of the mistakes we're making because we didn't know. You know, we didn't. The generation that I was did not know. My professors at Bryn Mawr didn't know. One of my professors told me, well, well, Miss Hubbard, I really think that we've got most of our problems solved already. He didn't know. He didn't know in 1951. So I propose that we develop a new world purpose, is to connect what's working by 2020. And the date has been picked by some other people, Stephen Dinan, including the one who worked with 2012, is how about International Peace Day 2012? And there's another thought in here that I want to briefly tell you. I don't know what my timing is. I'm not watching the clock. Where is the clock? Oh, right there. Oh, my time's over. Oh, it says, okay, well, I'll just take one more minute to tell you this. Sorry. I was looking at you, not it. Yeah. I ran for vice president in 1984. And I had a proposal which is so good that I was the other woman nominated, along with Geraldine Ferraro. And here was the proposal, that there should be in the office of the vice president a new function, a peace room as sophisticated as a war room, to scan for, map, connect, and communicate what's working in the world. Well, and when I entered that Democratic National Convention, I was told I'd be lucky to get one delegate if she were my mother. And I got over 200 by saying to these early morning caucuses, I want you to nominate me so I can make the declaration that the Democratic Party of the United States of America should have this as its goal. And they signed me up. So I don't think it's going to be in the government. And this may be accurate anyway, but it could be that we could do it. The people of the world, and particularly the Institute of Noetic Sciences. This is the very first time I've ever publicly said this, because it's just been coming on me in the last few weeks. I would like to join forces with you and everybody on Earth, so by 2020, International Peace Day, we'll see the world that's working, and once we see it, we'll never go back. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's great. Okay?
Yes, you're doing good.
We'll do it. We'll do it, Barbara. Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Okay.